Welcome to WikiPodcast. Ever wondered how the very first sparks of faith ignited? And, how those flickers eventually fueled the power of kings? Today we're diving into the third part of our religion series. We're tracing that incredible journey from the early, sort of enigmatic figures of shamans right up to the rise of sacred kingship. We'll be using Wikipedia as our launching pad, really exploring how spiritual beliefs and earthly authority first got intertwined. Our mission, to understand how these ancient practices laid the groundwork, for the religious and political systems that would eventually shape our world. Okay, let's unpack this fascinating connection. What exactly are we looking at when we talk about shamanism?
Yeah, that's definitely the perfect place to start. The term shamanism itself, it has pretty captivating backstory, though it's one with some twists and turns. We get it from the Russian word shaman, right, which likely comes from the Tungusic word saman. Yeah, and there's this popular idea that saman means to know, which, paints a picture of the shaman as someone with special understanding. But it's interesting, some linguistic experts have actually questioned this direct link because of some shifts in sounds over time, apparently.
Ah, okay. So not totally straightforward.
Not entirely. And even more intriguingly, Mircea Eliade, he was a prominent scholar of religion. He proposed a possible connection to the Sanskrit word shama. It referred to a kind of wandering holy person. And this term spread across Central Asia, especially with the rise of Buddhism. So even the name we use points to this really complex, potentially far-reaching history.
Wow, that's a great example of how even just one word can hold, like layers of history.
Yeah.
So the label itself has quite a journey. But when we try to describe the actual practices, is there one clear-cut definition we can work with?
Well, not really. And this is where it gets really interesting, actually. Anthropologists have pointed out that shamanism isn't just one single thing. By the early 21st century, as Ronald Hutton noted, there were at least 4 different ways the term was being used.
Different ways?
One, very broad definition, includes basically anyone who connects with the spirit world while in an altered state of consciousness.
Right.
Then another, more specific definition says this contact has to be at the request of other people.
Okay, for the community.
Exactly. A third definition tries to distinguish shamans based on the specific methods they use, compared to other types of spiritual practitioners like mediums or healers.
I see.
And finally, sometimes the term is simply used to refer specifically to the traditional religions of indigenous peoples in Siberia and nearby parts of Asia.
So, quite a range.
Definitely. The Oxford English Dictionary offers a sort of practical definition. Someone who can access and influence the spirit world, often by entering a trance for things like divination and healing. But what's fascinating here is this lack of a single definition. It tells us a lot about the sheer diversity of practices we're grouping together under this one term.
It really sounds like trying to put a neat label on something that's inherently varied, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if there's no single definition, what's the core idea, the thread that seems to run through these different practices?
The central thread, I'd say, is a spiritual practice where a specific person, the shaman, interacts with what's understood as the spirit world. And they do this through altered states of consciousness, often called a trance.
Okay, so trance.
Right. And the goal of this interaction is usually to bring spiritual power or knowledge back into the everyday world. For things like healing, finding answers, or just generally helping people.
So they're like intermediaries.
Exactly. You can think of shamans as go-betweens or messengers between the human and spirit realms. They often focus on healing by addressing the soul, with this belief that spiritual imbalances or injuries can actually show up as physical sickness.
So they're looking at a deeper level of cause and effect.
Yeah.
Even if it's not visible in the way we usually think about it. Now, the Wikipedia entry also mentions some pretty significant concerns around using the term shamanism itself. Why is there this hesitation or criticism?
Yeah, this is a really crucial point to understand. Anthropologist Alice Kehoe, for instance, she's raised concerns about cultural appropriation, especially when, westernized or New Age practices adopt the term shamanism in ways that can distort or really oversimplify authentic indigenous traditions.
Right, taking it out of context.
Exactly. There's a worry that it can unintentionally reinforce outdated and even harmful stereotypes. Kehoe also challenges the idea, which was popularized by Mircea Eliade, of this universal, unchanging shamanism stretching way back to ancient times. She argues that things like drumming or entering trance states, well, they're found in many different cultures and shouldn't just automatically be lumped into one single neat category.
That makes sense.
And Billy Ray Belcourt points out the colonial aspect, suggesting that using a broad term like shamanism to cover all these diverse spiritualities of indigenous peoples, well, it can mask the historical violence and the ongoing political struggles these communities have faced. It can sort of diminish the richness and complexity of these traditions by implying a false sense of uniformity.
So it's not just about a lack of precision, but about the potential for causing harm or misunderstanding.
Precisely. Mihaly Hopal has even suggested using terms like shamanhood or shamanship instead.
Shamanhood.
Yeah, to emphasize the variety and the practical application of these local customs, rather than suggesting a unified system of belief, which the Huntsism suffix might imply.
Right, like it's one single doctrine.
Exactly. And Piers Vitebsky adds that while you can find surprising similarities across some practices sometimes, there isn't a single unified shamanism. And these beliefs often exist alongside other spiritual frameworks too. The term itself can kind of create an illusion of a more coherent thing than might actually exist on the ground.
This gives us a much more nuanced understanding of the term itself. It sounds like while shamanism is a label we often encounter, we really need to use it with awareness. Awareness of its limitations and potential for misrepresentation. Okay, so shifting our focus a bit then, where do we see the historical roots of these kinds of practices, and what were some of the fundamental beliefs associated with them?
Historically, practices that we often identify as shamanic are deeply connected to indigenous and tribal societies. There's usually a core belief in the shaman's ability to bridge the gap to the other world, for healing, communicating with spirits, even guiding souls after death.
And geographically.
The origins are frequently linked to places like Mongolia and the indigenous communities of far northern Europe and Siberia. And it's really important to remember that despite all the pressures of colonialism, many indigenous communities today are actively engaged in revitalizing and reclaiming their ancestral spiritual traditions.
That's good to hear. And in terms of shared beliefs, what were some of the common threads that scholars like Eliade identified?
Eliade highlighted several recurring beliefs. Central to many of these traditions is the idea that spirits exist, and they play a significant role both in individual lives and for the community.
Right, spirits are key.
Definitely. And these spirits could be seen as benevolent or malevolent. Shamans are believed to have the capacity to communicate with these spirits. They often enter trance states to have visionary experiences, and even sometimes have their own spirit journey, leaving the body to travel to the supernatural realm. Animal spirits frequently appear too as guides, maybe as signs or as messengers. And practices of divination, like interpreting omens or using special objects to gain insight, those are also common.
So trying to understand the future or hidden things.
Exactly. The fundamental understanding is that the visible world is just permeated by invisible spiritual forces that directly influence the living. Shamans often address illness by confronting harmful spirits, or maybe by using their knowledge of medicinal plants. Sometimes they're even guided by the spirits associated with those plants.
Like plant spirits.
Yeah, like we see with the use of medicine songs or icaros in some Amazonian traditions. And objects imbued with spiritual power, often called totemic items, they also play a significant role.
It paints a picture of a world where the spiritual and physical are just deeply intertwined, aren't they? And the shaman is the skilled navigator of that interconnectedness. The concepts of the soul and spirit seem particularly important here. How are those ideas generally understood in these contexts?
Yeah, concepts of the soul are often used to explain different events. For instance, healing might be understood as the shaman literally retrieving a lost part of a person's soul.
Retrieving a soul part.
Or, say, a lack of success in hunting could be explained by the need to respectfully release the souls of the animals that have been hunted.
Ah, okay, a kind of spiritual balance.
Exactly. Spirits themselves are often perceived as these invisible beings that are capable of taking on human or animal forms. And beliefs about spirits can also explain things like the origins of particular skills or talents. Someone's ability as a storyteller or a musician might be seen as a gift from or a connection to the spirit world.
So, a successful hunter might be seen as having a strong relationship with animal spirits, or gifted artists might be considered touched by a creative spirit. It's a very holistic and interconnected worldview. Now, how do shamans actually do what they do? What are the methods they use to interact with the spirit world, and how do they learn these skills?
Well, the ways shamans enter the spirit world are quite diverse. They often speak of traversing what's known as the axis mundi.
Axis mundi.
Yeah, think of it as a kind of cosmic center or a connecting point between different spiritual realms. They travel this through altered states of consciousness, and these states can be achieved through various means. Things like autohypnosis, sometimes the use of entheogens, those are psychoactive substances used in spiritual practices,
Right.
or through elaborate ritual performances. Music and songs, sometimes imitating the sounds of nature, are also frequently used to help induce these states.
And how does someone become a shaman? Is it chosen? Inherited?
It can happen in different ways. The calling might come through powerful dreams or significant life experiences, maybe visions. In some societies, yes, this role is believed to be inherited, passed down through families. The training, though, is often really extensive and can involve what's sometimes called the shamanistic initiatory crisis.
Initiatory crisis. Sounds intense.
It often is. It's a period of intense physical or psychological hardship. This concept of the wounded healer is pretty significant here.
The wounded healer.
Yeah, the idea that the shaman-to-be might experience a near-death encounter or maybe a symbolic journey to the underworld. Through that, they gain knowledge and understanding of illness and suffering, which then allows them to heal others.
So they have to go through it themselves in a way.
In a way, yes. And instruments like the drum, especially among Siberian shamans, are vital tools. They're used for achieving altered states and for facilitating the shaman's journey between the worlds.
The wounded healer archetype is such a powerful one, this idea that facing darkness allows you to bring light to others. And the drum as a tool for spiritual travel, that's a really evocative image.
Right.
What kinds of roles did shamans play within their communities? It sounds like their influence went far beyond just spiritual guidance.
Oh, absolutely. Their roles were incredibly multifaceted. Primarily, yes, they sought knowledge and power in the spirit world to bring about healing in the physical world. They often received messages and guidance through dreams and visions, and were believed to have spirit allies or guides helping them.
Right, spirit helpers.
Exactly. As healers, they were seen as capable of restoring lost aspects of the soul, maybe cleansing negative spiritual energies. They also served as crucial mediators, communicating with spirits on behalf of the community.
Like negotiating.
Sometimes, yes, including with the spirits of those who had passed away, maybe to resolve conflicts or offer appeasement. Beyond this, they might lead important ceremonies and sacrifices, preserve oral traditions through storytelling and song.
Wow, historians too.
In a sense, yes, they might practice divination to foresee future events and even act as psychopomps,
Psychopomps.
guiding souls on their journey to the afterlife. Some cultures even had specialized shamans with distinct roles, like the psychopomps among the Nanai people were specifically focused on that task.
So they were part doctor, part therapist, part historian, sometimes even part grief counselor, all rolled into one. It really emphasizes how integral they were to the well-being of their societies. And it seems their influence wasn't limited to just the spiritual and personal realms. I think I recall reading about ecological and even economic aspects.
Yes, absolutely. Their role often had significant ecological dimensions. As key interpreters of tribal symbolism and cosmology, shamans often played a leading part in managing the relationship between the community and the environment, sometimes setting restrictions on hunting and fishing, for example, to maintain ecological balance.
Ah, like conservationists.
In a way, yeah. For example, the Tucano people in South America have a complex system linked to these beliefs that helps prevent overhunting. The shaman is seen as symbolically able to release the souls of game animals, maintaining a balance.
Fascinating. And economically.
Economically, their role could also be important. In many Inuit communities, for instance, shamans received compensation for their services. This was often understood to be directed towards their helping spirits, not just personal gain.
Okay.
And interestingly, in some cultures, like during the Chosun dynasty in Korea, the prevalence of female shamans provided a really significant pathway for women to achieve economic independence in a society that otherwise limited their financial opportunities quite a bit.
That's a really insightful point about female shamans and economic agency. It really highlights the wide-ranging impact of this role, doesn't it? Now, thinking about the progression we mentioned at the start, from these shamanic figures to the emergence of sacred kingship, how might the spiritual authority of a shaman have sort of paved the way for that kind of political and religious consolidation?
Well, while our current sources don't explicitly map out that transition step by step, we can definitely see the foundational elements. Think about the shaman's established position of spiritual authority, their perceived direct line to powerful unseen forces, and their crucial role in ensuring the community's well-being, good health, successful hunts, overall prosperity.
Right. They held a lot of influence.
Exactly. So as societies became more complex, it's not hard to imagine how individuals or perhaps certain lineages who held this kind of spiritual power could have, in some instances, consolidated both spiritual and political authority.
Merging the roles.
Potentially, or having one legitimize the other, the shaman's ability to mediate with the spirit world and ensure the community thrived. Well, that could have been a precursor to rulers claiming a divine mandate or a special relationship with the supernatural.
Ah, using that spiritual connection to justify their political rule.
Precisely. It's a compelling potential pathway for how religious belief and political power started to intertwine so closely in many societies.
It's like the shaman's spiritual influence provided a kind of template, maybe, for a more centralized form of authority that claimed divine backing. It makes a lot of sense. Now, the Wikipedia entry also touches on the decline and, in some cases, the ongoing revitalization of these traditions. What were some of the factors that led to a decline in shamanic practices?
Several factors really contributed to this decline, unfortunately. Colonialism and the spread of imperial power often led directly to the suppression of indigenous spiritual practices. They were often actively discouraged or forbidden.
Right. Forced assimilation.
Yes. Also, the rise of skepticism and disbelief within communities themselves, particularly as societies underwent significant changes, modernization. That could also lead former shamans to abandon their practices or become hesitant to share their knowledge. And then there's the natural loss of knowledgeable individuals through death. That meant the disappearance of irreplaceable personal experiences and specific ritual knowledge.
Even if the story survived, the lived experience was lost.
Exactly. Even if some core beliefs persisted within the community, the shaman's unique personal experiences are irreplaceable. In many instances, this loss happened alongside broader threats to traditional belief systems and even the languages in which these traditions were embedded. However, it is important to remember that in some more remote regions, these traditions showed remarkable resilience. Examples like Inuit and the Ganassan shamanism continued for much longer periods, resisting some of those pressures.
And what about the efforts to keep these traditions alive today? It's encouraging to hear that there's a movement towards revitalization in some communities.
Yes, definitely. There are various initiatives underway. These include efforts to record the memories and the knowledge of elders, which is crucial, as well as tradition-preserving and revitalization programs often led by authentic former shamans themselves, particularly among groups like the Saka and Tuvan people in Siberia.
That's fantastic.
It really speaks to the enduring importance and value of these traditions for these communities. Although it's also worth noting a cautionary point that has been raised regarding the phenomenon of so-called plastic medicine people in some Native American contexts.
People claiming authenticity without the background.
Something like that.
Right.
It highlights the complexities and the potential for misrepresentation, even within revitalization efforts. It's a delicate balance.
So it's a complex picture of loss, resilience, and the ongoing challenges of maintaining authenticity in a rapidly changing world. So what does this all mean, then, for understanding the origins of religion and that shift towards sacred kingship? We've seen how shamans, acting as these vital links between the human and spirit worlds, wielded significant power and influence within their communities. Their roles in healing, divination, ecological balance, even economic life,
Yeah.
it really underscores their central position. As societies evolved, it's conceivable that the authority held by these spiritual figures could have, in certain contexts, transitioned or at least contributed to the emergence of rulers claiming divine connections or mandates. This deep dive into shamanism provides a really crucial perspective, doesn't it? For examining that intricate tapestry of early religious and political development, what stands out most to you about the shaman's role and its potential connection to later forms of leadership?
I think what's truly striking is how the shaman's initial authority, which seems rooted in this perceived ability to mediate with the unseen world, might have established a kind of blueprint for later forms of power. The idea that certain individuals possess a special relationship with potent forces capable of influencing the well-being of the entire community, that appears to be a really recurring motif in the development of both religious and political structures. This whole exploration, it really raises a fundamental question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About how spiritual authority, maybe initially focused on healing and guidance, can evolve and become so deeply intertwined with secular power and the establishment of hierarchical systems of rule.
Thanks for listening. Write us in the comments your opinion on the episode and what other topics you would like us to talk about. Subscribe to the channel to help us reach more listeners. Thank you and have an amazing day.